Hello, I'm Tim Skeet, and I'm here on behalf of the International Capital Market Association, ICMA. And this is the latest episode of Let's Talk Markets. And this afternoon we'll be talking a little bit about careers in finance and the capital markets. Alex.
Tim, you've obviously been in the market for, I should say, when I say a long career, it's probably a bit of an understatement, or a long time, but we'll get to that. Can you tell me about why finance? Why did you get into the finance industry in the first place? And then looking back after decades of being in the market,
I'm going to be honest on this. When I came into finance, I probably hadn't got a clue. Now, a lot of people haven't got a clue about finance because we don't explain ourselves terribly well. And I really didn't have a clue because I was a modern linguist. I had a degree in German literature. But what I did know was that I was going to learn something really interesting, and I was going to be exposed to a vital part of the economy. And I would be on a very steep curve. And all of those things have proven true. So in a sense that this was the obvious thing for people of my age back in that era, pre-Big Bang. For those of you who can't remember, don't know what Big Bang is, it's 1986. So I've been in the business a little bit longer than most people. And I will tell you today, I have not been disappointed by that choice on that day, all those years ago. Now, flash forwards, we're today. You haven't been in as long as me. What brought you in?
I think the point that you made around not knowing what the industry brings is, I think, still something that holds up today. At least for me, when I remember the first time looking at jobs in finance, it's the buzz of the industry, it's the energy, probably. It's really not knowing too much about what is in that industry that will lead you to a certain career track. But one really key thing that brought me into the career was seeing people from the industry in person. And I remember the very first time I got in touch with the industry in London, in the city at least, that was through the ICMA Primary Market Certificate. And that's a learning course where different people came in, and you will remember very well, and taught us about certain aspects of this industry. And back in the day, you walked into the room of, I think, 20, 25 young professionals.
Absolutely,
just
yeah.
getting going. And you stood in the middle of that room and you said, everybody who wants to talk to me about covered bonds, everybody who wants to challenge me, here I am, let's go. And I was just sitting there thinking, that's quite impressive. Who are those people in the industry, who can pull that off, who can be this confident about certain areas of this kind of complex environment? And at that time, I didn't really know what it was, but I knew how the people in the industry.
Right, so there are two things there. I remember doing these, and I continue to do them. It's an investment in the future. I'm passionate about offering you lot what I know, because at some point I'll go off and do something different, and it's you going to have to pick up the pieces. And I don't want to leave too much of a mess behind. And I remember doing all of that, and that was great. But the one thing that does tell me is that I went from being a student of German literature to knowing quite a lot about several technical fields of financial expertise. Intellectually, this was fascinating. I have a very low boredom threshold, and although covered bonds are probably the world's most boring product imaginable, it is a bit like, watching one of these things functions, a bit like watching paint dry. But the market itself, the dynamics, the people, the changes, the globalization that we've witnessed have been fascinating. But the question I then turn to you is, well, have you been disappointed by your experience?
I think, obviously, no. Otherwise, I wouldn't probably be in this industry. It definitely wasn't what I expected it to be, because it evolved so quickly. And I think one of the points that I've learned in my career, I feel, young saying that sitting next to you, but in my years in the business, what I've experienced is, if you say in 3 years' time or in 5 years' time, this will happen, like at this point I'm already smiling, because nobody can tell me what's going to happen in next year or in next 6 months. Things happen so quickly. The structures within teams, the structures in the industry, people move around. It's not that kind of industry, I feel like, where you can have a 5 or 10 year plan. I'm sure you will have a different view on that, but for me, I'm not disappointed. I wasn't really disappointed either, because it kept on changing so much in the years that I've been in.
Are you someone that likes to embrace change? Have you adapted with that, or how have you reacted?
Initially, I don't think I felt like change was particularly easy to handle with in this industry. But you kind of get to a point, and it's, for me, someone said to me, it's if you wake up every morning and embrace the day knowing that there will be something that you see for the very first time, then you will have a very good and calm career. If you're not comfortable with the fact that there will be something thrown at you that you can't deal with, you will just, I remember my first few days in the city, I was sitting there and I heard my name on the trading floor, and it's Alex. And I was like, oh boy, what is it this time? But then over time you start, getting comfortable and getting into the position of, actually, I can deal with whatever is going to come my way. And I think once you get into that mindset, you can embrace the change.
So, I mean, I always express it this way, is expect the unexpected. If you're comfortable with that, you'll do well. If you're not comfortable with that, this is probably not the place for you to be.
And speaking of unexpected, I actually, and I suppose many at my age in the career, haven't really dealt a lot with, the issue of being let go, changes in the industry, being fired. We are starting to experience this, I think, maybe for the very first time at this moment. I started my career back when...
You're entering the danger zone?
Exactly, as you would call it.
Yeah.
I started my career back when Draghi had his whatever it takes speech. And ever since, it was just free money, it was one way, and it felt like, the sky's the limit, and it will just go...
But let me talk about that, because in my experience, there are people who've had careers for life. I had a coffee with someone today who spent 21 years in the same bank doing the different jobs, but the same place. That was not my experience. I have lived in the danger zone, in the firing line for most of my career, and there were moments of sheer frustration, utter misery. Right? There are days like that, but then there are days when you think, actually, it's all worth it. This is great fun. So I can look back, having survived multiple assassination attempts. Right? I have plenty of wounds in my back, on my front, down my side, you name it. And one of the satisfaction points I have is I said, well, yeah, I'm still here. I'm still doing a job. I'm still in this business. I'm still talking to you, and you're talking to me. Now, you may well have another one of these career assassination attempts. It's part of our rich tapestry. And the one thing I say to everybody is survive it. Don't take it personally.
So how do you survive it?
Well, you pick yourself up, you dust yourself down, you network. You network like hell, because the network is what's going to save you. And you need to be investing in that. You need to be learning skills. So when I stand up in the middle of a room and talk about covered bonds, it was a skill I developed. I'm a financial institutions debt capital markets guy in my background. I wasn't originally in that particular market segment. I put myself in that market segment because an opportunity, I almost fell over it. And then I used that opportunity, pulled together various things, made myself an expert on something. You've got to keep retooling yourself. I became an expert in something different. I worked on bank capital, I worked on that, I worked on something different.
So exactly on that point of becoming an expert, one thing that I always struggle with, and I know the entire generation might be struggling with that as well at the moment, is you start your career, and the first 10 years of your career, you just put your head down and you work. And after 10 years, you become such an expert in a certain field, often in a very tiny, small field in capital markets. And then...
All right, well, let me tell you something. Let me tell you something right now. Generally speaking, no one is looking out for you but you. Now, that sounds bad. If you're lucky, you get a mentor or a guide or somebody to help you. I was not that lucky. Most of my guides and mentors got assassinated. They got gunned down. It happens, right? So I kind of had to,
repeating.
I had to get out there and do my own thing, and that's where the network comes in. Because in the network will people that will give you tips, give you help, give you guidance, and give you encouragement. It's a lonely place sometimes, so I think I have to emphasize that. You have to fight your own battles, but there are people that will help you. And I think you've found that already, because you've spoken to people, you've used some of the ICMA connectivity, for instance, to put you where you are. So you've got at every point, learn something and be good at it, so that you can stand in the middle of a room and speak with some authority. But be prepared to move on. Keep an eye on the horizon. Figure out where things are going and make sure your network is live and keen so that you can move with it.
How do you fight the challenge I think most of us understand that you need to broaden your network, you need to be seen, you need to have different skill sets, but often it's you just don't get the opportunity. If you have extremely long days, if you have extremely long hours, young professionals very often don't have, and I know it's about priority, I know what you're trying to say, but very often the issue is really about young professionals in this industry don't have the full, they can't decide over their time.
You're right, and I went through that myself. We had different pressures because we didn't have technology in the early days. So we didn't have the constant bombardment, but on the other hand, we were even more isolated in some ways because we didn't have that connectivity. And you've got to find a way of doing it. And you can get overwhelmed by the sheer intensity of the experience of working in a business where your employer just wants you to focus on that. But you've got to tell yourself, yeah, I need to be the expert on that. That's what's getting me paid. That's what's keeping me in this job. But this may not keep me in this job getting paid forever. And only you have to decide that and know that. And you have to figure out, well, when are you going to be entering that danger zone? So if you're in the danger zone right now, you've got to be thinking about that. And you've got to find the time to do that networking. Because that is not an option. How do you do it? Well, each and every one of us has to figure that out. But we're sociable creatures. I was a capital markets guy, so the nature of my job was to talk to people, connect with people, go and have cups of coffee with people. Figure out how you work it into your job. And it is no shortcut or easy answer.
Do you put yourself into that danger zone by making mistakes, or is it by purely the industry shifting and moving and changing?
Look, it can be a combination of that. It's very frequently simply not a lot you can do about it, because it shifts in regulation, it shifts in technology, it shifts in a bunch of things. I mean, I've had 2 investment banks fail on me while I was working at them. I had a failed merger that had drastic implications for where we are. There's a lot of stuff with just the world moving around me and the tectonic plates shaking. I had no control over that. But there have been times when you just get called into a room and shot because you've got a target on your back. Did I put it there? Maybe. Yeah, I mean, listen, sometimes we don't exactly know why you're the target as opposed to somebody else. But again, I said it earlier, don't take this thing personally because it generally is not. Somebody, if they're doing a downsizing, someone's got to go. The higher you go, the more senior you become, the more expensive you are, the more that target grows. And remember, in our industry, it's a little bit upwards or outwards, upwards or out the window-wards, because that's the way it's got to be. I've got to make room for you. Now, you will never say you want my job, but I know you do. But you can't have my job till I'm gone, right? So you may be charming. We may get on terribly well. But someone opens that window, you get the opportunity to push me, you'll probably take it. That's the way things are a little bit. And I have to know that. So I need to make sure I'm vacating. I have a plan. And guess what? You look up, there aren't the jobs above that there used to be either. So that's what I call the crab career. You've got to learn to move without necessarily going up. It's a lot of sideways swerves, and you hope that net you're going forwards and not backwards. And that's kind of what I've done.
Coming back to the very first point about why finance, I think the point from my perspective at least, is knowing that this is an industry where you will actually have to move up. You have to level up to survive. There's no other way. The way I look at the industry, there's no, I'm going to be in this position for the next 10, 15 years. This is really not it. And I think this pressure, as it may be negative for some, on the other hand, is quite positive for many entering the industry in comparison to many other great industries that are out there. But do you think the industry in itself, ever since you started, in views such as pressure that it puts on people to level up in their career, to increase their skill set, has it changed?
If I'm very honest, I think in some there's good and there's bad here. I mean, part of the problem of our industry, and this is my generalization of observation over time, is that we don't always manage people very well. Because people get promoted because they're good at their job, not necessarily because they're good at managing people. And people don't get trained to people manage. And that is one of the failings. And a lot of the people who get into management positions really shouldn't be in management positions. Now we're getting to a point now where the industry is beginning to separate out management from making money. There used to be a time when you used to measure your status by the number of people that reported to you, the number of bonuses you set, and the nominal power that you wielded. I think we're moving a little bit away from that. I think there is more of a sense that we need to manage people and manage careers. At the end of the day, we invest heavily, as we do, on training people up to do something specific. These people are capable of other jobs. I'm in the camp where we should be hanging on to talent and helping our talent, guide them as they go through their career to move to different sections, areas, and different opportunities. We've not been good enough at doing that. But I think that's what we do need to be doing. So what I experienced isn't necessarily what you need to be experiencing either. So again, it's a matter, and this is where the education comes in, frankly. Better management, better career development opportunities, and an HR department shouldn't be just, you know, the greeting department and then the farewell department. There is a real function there, which I think is being embraced by the industry. And I don't want to be too optimistic about it, but I do see this happening now. Is that not your impression?
Yes and no. I think it really depends, first of all, it really depends on your team that you work with. It reports on your, it depends on your direct report. It depends on the institution you're in. And then I also feel like it depends on the time that you're currently in. Like, I remember after COVID, everybody went back to the office, and it was this big headline, war for talent. Everybody has a war for talent. We need to get the best people in the industry. We are losing them to technology, to other industries. It's really a war. And 6 months down the road, it really quickly changed from a war for talent to be happy that you still have a job and don't ask for too much. And around the point on education and doing something on top of what you're being asked to do on a daily basis, I find it's sometimes hard to actually convince, not only your direct report, but convince the institution as a whole that they should be investing in you for doing this extra education, investing in you for doing this, getting this skill set.
And that comes back to the point I made earlier. I mean, at some organizations you are in, and this is not your one, and not my one, but I've been in them when they are on survival mode themselves. And I've been in organizations where every 6 months they go through and slice another level of staff out of it. And I went around the market explaining why that guy I brought in last week, who is the excellent new guy on this product, is now gone, and we got a new one who's even better. There's only so many times you can do that, because people sometimes forget the customer. People forget the end user. You and I know that the customer actually matters, and they don't like all of that change. So we need to get better at managing that process. And you're right, you know, it's inconsistent across our industry. But again, I think we have a better understanding for what we need to be doing. The standards and the behaviors are getting better. And remember, look, you're going up in the organization. You know, I'm still here, and I'm expecting to institute better standards of management and behavior. And I will go around preaching that and telling people, because I think we do need to do this better than we have done it in the past.
How much of that has to come from, you know, senior leadership, like your level, and how much of that may come from junior people getting into the industry? From, as you've mentioned, you're the best example from such a diverse background. I think people getting into the financial industry might be coming from all sides of different backgrounds. Who's responsible to push this?
Well, I think, again, look, an intelligent industry with intelligent people, it should be from both ends of it, clearly. But of course, we're in an industry where the people at the top tend to push things down and tend to tell people, get on, and this is how we do it. My observation will be that the intelligent managers will listen and will adapt, because losing talent is an expensive business. Making bad hiring decisions, getting rid of the people you discover 6 months later you need. And by the way, I've looked back over the many places I've been. The ridiculously stupid hire and fire decisions that have been made have cost this industry a fortune. A fortune. It makes no sense. The human cost is one thing, but the financial cost is another. And even the money, that is something people are supposed to understand. But I've seen a huge amount of value destruction through not really thinking it through properly. But so you know, we're in an industry now which I think is better regulated in many ways. Maybe it's overly regulated in some ways, but generally better regulated, calmer, and in many cases it's a lot more difficult to hire and fire in the ways that used to be prevalent in the past. You have certain rights and protections that didn't exist when I was the object of target practice.
Do you think the current generation has more stability, let's say, in building their career in finance?
Well, I think there are other things that will cause instability, but broadly speaking, I would like to think that there are better employment terms today than there were. Now, you may not feel that, and looking by the expression in your face, you probably don't. But then, you know, I'm sitting here thinking, there were days when I was a young banker and I was looking over my shoulder the whole time because you just didn't know what was around the corner. And if you think about it, and some people we're here in finance, we're in an industry that has its ups and downs, it's cyclical. There was a time when, you know, I lecture at universities and I asked people, do you want to go into finance? Do you want to go into tech? And over the cycle, there are lots of people who, after the financial crisis, didn't want to touch finance with a barge pole. That's an English expression, it means don't get close to it, it's toxic. That's changed because we then had everyone wanting to go into tech at that stage, or fintech, or whatever it was. Now, a lot of people have discovered that sitting on a beanbag is no more secure than sitting in a wobbly financial institution about to blow up. Because effectively that's what they are, unregulated, wobbly financial institutions that don't have a lifespan.
Yeah.
So a lot of these things are exciting for a short period of time, but then they wobble. And they are highly unpredictable as well. So people have figured out that it's not a lazy life to go and work in a startup or in a techie company, that you actually have to work pretty hard and there is a downside to doing that. Now, I think there's greater information now. So when I go around and ask people, where do you want to work? A fair number want to work in financial services. Why? Because there is a little bit more predictability to some of it than there is to some of these other new technologies. It doesn't mean don't go into those, but what it means is that it's no longer such a clear-cut debate anymore.
I would definitely agree on the point. I have so many young professionals reaching out to me from university wanting to work in finance.
Absolutely.
And the picture they're painting is not an industry that is, you know, lacking talent. It's definitely not what they hear from the employers, from the banks or whoever is in the capital markets. It's quite the opposite. Some of the top university classes have issues finding positions.
Yeah.
So it's sometimes I find it odd that we have this big picture of the finance industry as lacking talent, but at the same time, when you go to universities, there's still so many young professionals or so much talent that really wants to go into the financial industry, no matter what headlines you have, no matter how bad the headlines might be, no matter how bad the firing season might be. All of this has never really stopped people wanting to go into finance.
It never did stop it. And in fact, the headlines are never as bad today as they have been at some points in the past, because they were really terrible at some points. But I think people want to come in, and we still attract the best and some of the most motivated people. Now, the thing I always say, and remember this, these are highly motivated, really interesting people, but by the way, they're not all nice. There are a lot of very dysfunctional people in our industry as well, right? And you know that, and I know that. And you do not have to like them all, and they probably won't have to like you all the time. But they're still interesting people, and we still attract these people. There's no shortage of these people. There will not be a shortage of these people, because despite all the cycles and despite the doom mongers, despite the many theories, this industry is still here, because we change, we evolve, we adapt. But as the industry adapts, so we as individuals have to. But that's something we have already known for some time.
I actually think, for me, going into this industry, thinking about leveling up, getting new skill sets, getting better every year, moving up in the hierarchy, it's very hard for me to think about taking a big step back.
Yeah. And we're all conditioned to be ambitious, to believe in ourselves, and to believe that we're heading in one direction only. The harsh reality is it doesn't quite work that way. If you get really lucky, you might just manage that. That was not my experience. It's not the experience of a lot of people. There comes a point where there is nowhere to go up to. And you need to figure out what you do. Now, I have known people who put themselves out of the industry and the business because they would only accept a job that was better paid and bigger than the last job they had. Now, I was pragmatic. Maybe I was too ready to take a smaller job. Maybe that held me back. I don't know. History doesn't narrate. But I'm still here and I still have a fascinating job which I am enjoying, which tells me that I didn't do it all bad. And I think that is a psychological lesson that you have to be prepared occasionally to do the sideways backwards tread. Measure yourself as you want to measure yourself, not as you expect other people to be measuring you.
Speaking of measuring success, and particularly on the point of going sideways or going back in your career, how would you measure success in your career in finance for yourself? Obviously, you can talk about the titles, the salary, but there must be more, right? There must be other other criteria.
In my case, I met some fantastic people. I've met some awful people. I've met fascinating people. I've always been interested in people. I've traveled the world. I've had some great lunches. I've had some very rich experiences. I have great stories to tell. It is for somebody like me who is a bit hyperactive, has a low boredom threshold. I spend a lot of time in the industry not getting bored. I was on the edge of my seat a lot of that time. And I don't think everybody can say that. And it was fun. Not all of it, but it was.
I think for myself, especially when I hear stories from, let's say, other industries, and I compare that to our day-to-day job when we get into the office, and our days usually don't start on a very quiet note, right? Our days start, and when they start, it's just busy until the day ends, and it probably doesn't really end. And I find, especially this buzz of deal making, this let's say, how do you describe it? It's the speed at which the industry functions. It's something that whenever the grass isn't always greener on the other side. No. I turn it a little bit around, but it really isn't always greener on the other side. And when I talk to people outside of the financial industry, and I think the experience that we are having for people who enjoy having this kind of deal-making environment, once you leave that industry, I don't really, and I've been thinking about that, there isn't really much out there where you would experience or have quite such an experience.
But again, you need to adapt, because the buzz you get from doing deals, which I totally recognize, and it's one of the reasons I stayed in the area I was in. But when you start becoming more managerial, you do leave that behind. So you actually already have to address that side of things. I do a deal, I'm in a business where I'm not connected with deals in the same way anymore. I miss it? Of course I do. So you have to compensate in other ways. But again, just one other point I want to make about, I look back on it, I think I made a difference in a very small way, in a very modest way, at various points in time, I was able to do something useful as part of the overall economy and part of the overall flow of capital. There is this perception from people who don't understand the industry, don't know us from the outside, that there's something wrong with what we do, that it doesn't serve society, it's not useful, it's not helpful. Having worked in it, I see things differently, of course I would. But I genuinely feel that the value we add is significant, because we do facilitate capital flows in a meaningful way. And that we have served society in a useful way. But I would challenge you, but one of the points that I think we need to come back to, communications is vital. People still do not understand what we do. And we're talking about careers here, we're not talking about the nuts and bolts of our business. But there is a very low general understanding. You didn't understand it before you came in. I didn't understand it. We understand it better. It's our responsibility to get out there and tell the world what it is we do and why it matters to them, because it does. And I think that's a message I have for everybody at every level of seniority. But particularly for you, because we need to figure out how to tell people what we do and why it matters. To you, to me, but to the world outside. Because it does.
It does. And I totally agree. Being in industry, I think I see it. But as you say, it's very challenging, and it's hard to go out there and say, me as a banker, this is what I'm doing for the society. But it is, as you say, in a humble and modest way, the industry as a whole needs to find a way of doing this.
Absolutely. And again, I think that's a very difficult ask. But it is, you know, getting to the point where I'm in the latter stages of my career, and I haven't completely finished. But that's a responsibility I have to pass to you lot. That's one of the things you will need to figure out.
Well, Tim, thank you very much for your advice. As I've alluded to, you've always passed on advice to me, and you're obviously still full of advice. And thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for being here today. I did enjoy it, and yeah, we've touched upon quite a few important challenges.
Right, and in 10 years' time,
together.
These chairs are going to be swapped, and you're going to be talking to a younger, ambitious man or woman who's going to be asking you much the same things. Think now about what you will say then, and remember what you had for lunch.
Thank you.